calling all social justice advocates, world changers, and good troublemakers. This episode is going to ignite you, challenge you, and change you. Coming up next, we're speaking with the one and only Lindsey Krinks. She is a street chaplain, a social justice advocate, and co-founder of Open Table Nashville, an organization serving those that are marginalized and homeless right on the street. She is going to challenge us as a church to wake up, speak up, and speak out on social justice for those that are voiceless. She tells us what needs to not just be deconstructed, but leveled to the ground and rebuilt, and also why social justice is not just an extension of our faith, but the very foundation of it. Guys, you are going to be shaken up by this powerhouse. I love her. You'll love her too. Available on all podcast platforms, or subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you on the path.
You're listening to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nemhart. Follow Cheryl Nemhart on all social media platforms.
Hey guys, welcome to On the Path. And I'm so excited today because I get to talk with someone that I'm calling a soul sister. And when I say soul sister, that is someone who shares my heart for the things that my heart beats for. And this lady is passionate about social justice and social change. And I'm telling you, this book we're going to talk about, guys, is going to blow you away. We are speaking with the one and only author, Lindsey Krinks, social justice advocate, and her book, Praying with Our Feet, is going to hopefully shake you up and challenge the way you think about living in this world. Let me tell you a little bit about Lindsey. Lindsey's a Vanderbilt Divinity School graduate. She's a co-founder of Open Table in Nashville, which is a nationally acclaimed interfaith homeless outreach not-for-profit. She is a fellow with the New Leaders Council, and she speaks everywhere to students, teachers, communities, and across the country. But more importantly, she is making really significant, lasting change in the area of poverty, homelessness, and more. I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. Think, welcome to On the Path.
Oh, it's so good to be with you today. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm just so excited to have you because I think people like you and I were just cut from a different cloth, and you're going to get me. I get you, you get me. And I'm so excited about this conversation. I think that there's never been a more important time to speak about social justice.
Amen. Yes.
Yes. Well, I think the first thing I want to talk about is the actual title of the book. And so when I was reading it, when I picked it up, first of all, Praying with Our Feet, what a title. Like, it resonated with me on so many levels. And I'd love to know just how this book came to be, the origin story of the book, and why you are challenging us to think about faith in a different way, please.
Absolutely. So, growing up, I was really taught to keep my faith in the private realm. I was taught that it's about personal morality, personal salvation stuff. And it wasn't until I came to Nashville, Tennessee, in the States to college, and I really started studying the civil rights movement. And I was introduced to a lot of different freedom fighters, one of whom was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And the first time I ever heard this idea of praying with our feet, of our faith being a public act that has social, economic, and political implications. It was when I came across that phrase, praying with our feet. And, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel is a scholar of the Hebrew prophets. He had to flee Nazi-occupied Europe, where his family was persecuted and killed. He came over to the States and saw segregation, saw the evils of racism, and started getting involved with, Martin Luther King. And when he was marching arm in arm with King, he said, I felt as if my legs were praying. Walking isn't kneeling, but our legs were uttering songs. And that idea, again, of this public faith of, in the face of injustice, in the face of oppression, what are people of faith and conscience called to? Are we called to just sit in our room and kind of utter prayers with our hearts and lips? Or are we prayed to get involved, to get our hands and feet dirty? And I believe we're called to get our hands dirty in the struggles for a better world. And so my own personal faith journey of kind of opening up my faith is kind of what this book is about, alongside taking you, the reader, to, the streets of Nashville and plunging you into our reality.
Wow. And, I thank God for people like yourselves that are taking the bold, brave steps to go to the many places that people don't feel comfortable, feel like they don't want to be anywhere near. But it is really walking out, fulfilling the steps of Jesus himself. I'd love to know, 2020 and 2021. Oh my goodness. Like, right? Just throw your head back. What a year. Like the past 12 months alone, kind of like literally spring of 2020 to spring of 2021, global, national disasters, global pandemics, economic downturn, racial tensions, homelessness, poverty, just devastation, crippling communities. I'd love to know. When you look at all of that, what is coming to you as the big lessons that you're learning, that personally Lindsey's just getting rocked with right now?
It's been such a devastating year for so many of us. It's interesting, the week before the pandemic hit and the, safer at home orders hit here, my husband and I lost our home in a tornado. And I was 5 months pregnant. So
What?
the devastation for us hit right before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit our communities on the streets incredibly hard. If you think about what happened, the community centers closed, the libraries closed, the soup kitchens closed. So we had to scramble not only to salvage what we could from our home and support our neighbors, but also to support our neighbors on the streets. And then we've just gone from one crisis to the next, right? I've learned that I've never been a firmer believer that housing is a human right. There are more people than ever on the brink of homelessness with the eviction crisis. There are more people than ever on the streets. And to live without housing in society is to live in subhuman conditions.
Right.
We have mothers and their children living in storage units. We have families doubling and tripling up.
Oh my God.
We have people with severe health issues after hip replacements and other things. They're living under bridges in tent cities. So I truly believe that housing is a human right, and that that we have to do more. I've also learned, I think all of us, maybe on a global scale, have realized how interconnected we all are in new ways. The saints and people like Martin Luther King Jr. and others have always said, we're interconnected. Our beings are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
But we've never seen that more on a public health scale, right? Where literally someone's health across the world can end up impacting our health. Someone's health in our neighborhood can end up impacting ours. So I think we're learning these things. The last lesson I've really learned is that, my hope doesn't come and never has come from people in power, giving us a few crumbs.
Say that one more time for the people in the back.
Our hope does not come from people in power doling out a few crumbs to us. When the tornadoes hit, when the city shut down, we did not get government bailouts. It was neighbors helping neighbors. It was mutual aid. It was people opening up their own homes. It was when the soup kitchens closed, when the libraries closed for our people. It was the churches who said, well, we're going to make our sanctuary into a makeshift food pantry so that people across Nashville and the encampments can actually have food to eat and survive this. So when people realize that our liberation is bound up together, then it is a powerful force. And that is where my hope comes from, is from people caring for each other and understanding how interconnected we truly are. And I can't be well if you're not well. So we're going to work on this together.
Oh, Lindsey, wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I know that it has taken a toll. I'd love to, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, but you said in your book, you had this quote that just hit me so hard as I've been reading, and I have to quote it, and it's kind of sparked a question for me. In your book, shameless plug. Here we go. Praying with our feet. You got to get it, guys. Available everywhere. Please, please, please pick it up. It's gonna change and challenge you in such a good way. You had a passage in there that said, the quote that said this. You said, "It's the role of the people of faith and conscience to stand on the side of the oppressed and to refuse to let injustice have the final say." I love that. And I realized around this topic of social justice, especially in this past year, we've seen from even the storming of the Capitol, people sort of mixing in wrong ways religion and social justice and putting a bad taste in the mouth of others. And then church leaders that are saying, keep them separate. Keep social justice and Christianity and our faith separate. And then there's another demographic of people that are crying out saying, no, social justice is an extension of our Christian faith. I'd love to know where you stand on this, because you are on the grounds. You are obviously being moved and compelled by something. Do share.
I mean, I would say this is an extension of our faith. It's the foundation of our faith.
Come on.
So there's a couple anecdotes here. The theologian Cornel West said, justice is what love looks like in public.
My favorite quote. Yes.
Yes. We a few years back, we did Valentine's Day cards for our people, and that was what it said. Justice is what love looks like in public. People think justice is some dangerous thing, and maybe it is. If we're people in power and we like the status quo, maybe justice is dangerous to us. Maybe equity means that we're going to be shaken up and made uncomfortable a little bit, and that's how it should be, right? But if we think about the foundation of our faith, it is a God of love. It is a God who says all people are created in my image. And this conversation reminds me of Oscar Romero. So Oscar Romero is one of my personal heroes. He was the Archbishop of El Salvador in the late 70s, the time of incredible strife in his country. And he was like the safe pick for Archbishop, like all the people in power, all the elites, all the political folks who were like, he's pretty safe, so let's get him in because we can control him. But when he got in and he started seeing how the poor were being oppressed, how other priests were being murdered for standing in solidarity with peasants, he got involved. He stood on the side of the peasants. He started hearing their stories and speaking out. And people said, "You're being too political." And he said, "I'm not being political. I am defending the image of God in human beings."
Oh, wow.
It is the most theological thing. It is the most faithful thing I can do, defending the image of God in every human being, no matter how poor they are, where they live, what their skin color is, whatever. And so, I'd hope that people can open their minds and hearts a little bit. If we think the gospel is safe, we are mistaken. It wasn't safe for Jesus. His good news to the poor wasn't safe.
He's preaching, y'all. You keep going. I'm just going to collect the offering at this time. I'm going to call the choir to come while Lindsay's. Go ahead, Lindsey, girl. Go ahead.
We've got to call people into this dangerous, scandalous love that asks us to transform and asks us to have transformed, renewed relationships, not only between us and our neighbors, but between whole societies. And that's what equity and justice is. It's love magnified on a bigger scale, on a systemic scale.
And I, just as a bee, how do we do that? So we've got someone listening, feeling pretty compelled, pretty convicted, perhaps, by some of the things that you're sharing, and realizing personally that they just need to do more, not knowing how to start or where or all the details. Any advice for that person?
Absolutely. You do not have to come, under a bridge next week with me when the city's closing a camp down and you don't have to get arrested. Everybody starts where they are. All of us have to start where we are. We start where we are and we take the next step. When we move from service to solidarity, the way we move from service to solidarity is by closer proximity and relationships. So who is hurting in your sphere? Who is struggling, who is oppressed, who is poor, who is hurting? Be in closer proximity, build some relationships, get the name of the person that's standing on the median asking for change, carry socks, carry survival kits, carry things in your car so we can practice compassion in those one-on-one encounters. We start where we are, and maybe that's cracking open the prophet Isaiah and just, remembering our roots, reading our roots, cracking open the red letters of the gospel. And reminding ourselves what kind of God we serve, a God that uses outcasts for God's mission, a Jesus that goes to the margins and makes people uncomfortable. We are not called to be comfortable. We're called to be faithful. I remember a quote that I read that said that years back. It was an anonymous quote, but we're called to be faithful, not comfortable. So whatever that next step is, take it and have and pray that God meets you there, because I believe God will.
So good, Lindsey. Oh my goodness. Well, this book is just breaking me wide open, and I'm loving every word of it. And you actually quoted in this book Mary Beth Rogers. And her book called Cold Anger, in which she says this, her quote directly: hot anger destroys, and sometimes our structures and systems need to be leveled, need to be burned to the ground. And then there's other times where we need more of a cool anger so that it can be channeled and directed properly. So we're going to go there. We're going to go there with some cool anger. But I got to ask you, what needs to be leveled right now, Lindsey, for us? What needs to be broken down completely? And then what needs to be rebuilt?
I love this question so much. So there are so many systems that need to be leveled. I think, first of all, of white supremacy. I think about our, oh my goodness, our systems of incarceration and policing. They are in this. So I live in the South. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and the systems of policing in the South were started from, the colonial system, where plantation owners would employ poor white folks, set them against poor Black folks, and pay them to patrol for runaway slaves. This is how policing started in the South and southeastern United States. That kind of protection of property and whiteness has been carried on in these systems. And I have so many friends who are white and who are middle class or upper class, and they think the systems of policing are fine. They just need some tweaks here and there. I've been working on the streets for 14 years, and I have seen the toll that those systems have taken. And on a federal level in the United States, for the last 30, 40 years, what we have done is we have defunded our social safety nets. We gutted the funding for housing. We don't have living wages. What we're channeling funding into is policing and the mass incarceration system. I can't call it criminal justice, because it is not a criminal justice system. It is a criminal legal system that too often oppresses Black, brown, poor folks and folks who have mental health issues. So these systems, I can imagine a world, and so many of our prophets can too. We can imagine a world where people have housing. Some societies are doing it. They're so much closer to us, or so much closer to ending homelessness, so much closer to having systems of care instead of carceral systems. I can imagine a system where everyone has housing, where we're not caging people who are hurting, where we're restoring them, where we're transforming communities. So these systems have to have a reckoning. They have to have a reckoning.
Mm.
I believe we're beyond reform, but certainly with white supremacy, so much of the United States has been built from a base of white supremacy that needs to be torn to the ground. Reparations need to be made. We've got to have racial equity, and we've got to really look at our history and reckon with that as well, on an individual level, on an individual basis, but also a systemic and historical basis and theological. The last thing I've got to say.
That part. Go ahead.
Throughout history, there have been churches who have stood on the side of the oppressed. There were churches in Nazi Europe that either went to the gallows and the crematoriums with the folks who were Jewish, or they created almost like underground railroad, sheltering them, keeping them safe. There have also been churches that have maintained the status quo, that have been wedded to power, and they have perpetuated oppression. They've told social justice people to slow down, you're going too fast, like the white churches said during the civil rights movement. When your people,
and today.
Yes. And today, when your people are being crushed, when your people are being crucified and lynched and shot in the streets, you do not slow down. You weep, you mourn, you pray with your feet, right? So our people are dying on the streets every day. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a 23-year-old who was shot by the police because his mom made a mental health call for help. Our people are being killed, so we're not going to slow down. We're going to invite everyone in with us to this movement for justice and collective liberation. But we're not going to compromise, and our churches have to be on the side of the poor and oppressed.
Ladies and gentlemen, literally, as I am listening to Lindsey, my heart is exploding. I don't know how, when, but I have to join what you're doing. I have to join what you're doing. This is more than a podcast for me right now.
You're doing it. I'm so glad to be connected with you and your listeners. We're all doing it in different places, right? It's part of the same whole.
Yeah, I think the frustration for me comes in with the pushback that I've experienced at the hands of so-called pastors in churches. I am shocked. I am dismayed that doing this work of equity and amplifying diverse voices and trying to bring reparations and restore is a problem. We're considered troublemakers.
Good trouble, as John Lewis would say. Good trouble.
Chosen. Good trouble.
Oh, it is though. It's so defeating, but we've got to keep going forward. It's the only way we've ever moved forward, is by continuing to push and having those relationships where we call people in.
Mm-hmm. I think about this whole hard road that you and I walk, and so many others in the area of social justice. It's not easy, as we've shared already. We can be very misunderstood, very challenged, very marginalized too. Felt like a bit of an outcast. Oh, gee, sounds like Jesus. But I do think on the human side of things, I can't imagine how these past 12 months have impacted you, Lindsey, how they have shredded your heart, drained your emotional reserve, your mental health, those that are on your team. It has been harder than it has ever been. With the pandemic and the ripple effects of the pandemic just compounding the situation. Can you give us some insight? How are you doing? How is the team doing? Honestly, how are you staying up in these moments? How are you staying passionate about what you're doing? What do you need? Please share anything.
this work, when you enter into the work of justice, or, the work you do on the streets of Nashville, you're exposed to a lot of trauma, systemic trauma, and you take it into your body. As I mentioned, we have people dying every couple of days in Nashville on the streets. That's what things are like now. It didn't used to be like this. And so our team has had an incredibly difficult time. Um, I think it's very, I was listening to another podcast the other day that was talking about the neurobiology of trauma in this last year, this isolation that so many of us, almost all of us, right, have endured: the lack of touch, the lack of community,
Mhm.
the isolation, the uncertainty. And it's, we have to be kind to ourselves. We have to have grace with ourselves when we have lapses, when we feel short fused, when we are struggling. We have to have grace with each other and support our team. With our team, especially in the height of the pandemic, we would order dinners for our outreach workers, so they'd have meals when they got home after a long, grueling day. And we gave them extra pay and things like that, so they'd have what they needed. But we have to, if we're going to keep going, we have to drink from deep wells. If we're going to do this for the long haul, you cannot last in this work for the long haul if we're just dipping into shallow reserves. We in the Christian faith, at least for me, we drink from deep wells. We have so many resources. A practice of Sabbath, has been something that's important to me. I have a 10-month-old right now, and Sabbath has been very difficult. So I'm not doing super well with that. But I'm reading poetry. I'm trying to stay connected to my faith, things like that. And the last thing I'll say on this is, years and years ago, I was actually participating in Occupy Nashville here, which was a local manifestation of Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011. And a Catholic worker, kind of, heroine for me, Kathy Kelly, she came to Nashville and she was talking about her work in Afghanistan. It had been then. And we said, Kathy, how do you keep going? You've been doing this for decades. How do you keep going? And she got really quiet and she looked at us all like in the eyes. She just looked around the room and she said, keep falling in love. Like, keep falling in love. Fall in love with the work, fall in love with the people, fall in love with your God, fall in love with the prophets and the saints. Like, this deep well of love will keep filling you. Guilt will not fill you. These other things will not fill you up, but love will. So tap into that, drink from that well, and support each other, support each other.
I love that. And, as part of my own personal ministry, we all do different things to sort of raise finances and see to keep going. So I sell merch, and I have one of my favorite slogans is "Love out loud." Love out loud, as opposed to this sort of quiet, sort of church-contained love. Our love needs to be amplified and like just boisterous. And so I want to ask you, what does loving out loud look like in your line of work?
Love looks like loving out loud, and I love that. It's like the Cornel West quote, right? It looks like paying attention to people and practicing compassion on the micro level and also on the macro level. So on the micro level, it means affirming the human dignity of every person we come across, no matter how long they've been outside on the streets. It means carrying things with us, just like the Good Samaritan did, so that we're prepared to show mercy when we come across people. When our car is stopped at the median, or we see somebody in the parking lot, we have water, we have socks, we have things. That's that compassion on the micro level, that love on the micro level. On the macro level, it looks like getting to know our council members, getting to know our elected officials, and pushing for more affordable housing. We just stopped a bill that was going to make, in the Tennessee state legislature, that was going to make sleeping on public property across the state a felony offense.
Oh my gosh.
We had to, we had to put our boots to the ground and mobilize. But, connect with the groups like Open Table Nashville, connect with us, connect with the groups doing the work. They put out calls to action. We've been doing this for a minute, so we want to bring more people into the work, and say, if you're not sure, like, let's try this, try this. But plug in where you are, and with whatever issue has your heart on fire, because they're all connected anyway, right?
All
Um,
connected
they're all connected anyway.
they're all the heart of God.
Hmm.
I love that. And yeah, that's the thing. It's about pursuing, doing everything in our power to see a world, a community that reflects the heart of God, right? And
Yes.
that is love, compassion, justice, equality, unity. I love that. Thank you so much. You talked about open table, and I'd love to ask this question, because people are listening and they're so moved right now by what you're saying, and they're thinking to themselves, I live in, insert place here. How can I make a difference? But you can, by sowing a seed. Your dollars are traveling and doing the work that you can't do physically yourself. Could you let us know, how can we come alongside the work that Open Table is doing, and how can we track you and stay involved? Any of that information.
So Open Table Nashville is on socials, and I'm on socials too. We'd love to connect with folks there. We also take donations. We don't get government funds, just like a lot of nonprofits don't. So anything you want to kick our way is always appreciated. We have an Amazon wish list under Open Table Nashville. We have a website. We also just ask you to pay it forward in your community, carrying things, plugging in with the folks, but certainly any way that you can share your love and the resources you have is always welcome.
So good. And how can we follow you, Lindsey? Give us your social handles, please.
Yeah, just Lindsey Krinks. I joined Twitter last week, so I am super new. I am overwhelmed, but definitely Instagram is a really great place, and Facebook too.
Awesome.
Yes,
Oh, Lindsey, it's been such a pleasure talking to you guys. The book that we're speaking about today, and the author, an incredible woman, modern day Mother Teresa in my books, Praying with Our Feet, Pursuing Justice and Healing on the Streets, written by the one and only Lindsey Krinks. Please pick up a copy. Available anywhere and everywhere you get your books. Okay, Lindsey, are you ready for your surprise question?
Oh yes, I forgot. Yes.
I end a podcast with the same question, and it's amazing. No matter how many times I've asked this question, the answers are always completely different, which I love. So, in light of who you are and your organization and the topic that we've been speaking about today, finish this sentence. What is it time for? What is it time for? And you'll say it's time for, and just let it rip. And as many things as you want.
Oh, I'm ready. It is time for a reckoning. It is time for housing justice. It is time for racial justice. And it is time for us to do the work of collective liberation together.
Amen. And we're going to go deeper. Well, we're going to go one more level down. Here we go. Let's flip it. What is it not time for? What is it not time for?
Oh, these are so good. It is not time for our comfort or our safety. It's not time for our complacency or our fear.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Lindsey, you're my new sister girl. I'm telling you, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to track you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Is there any last words, anything you want to leave with our listeners?
It's just so good to be with y'all. And remember, you don't have to do it all. Take the next step, and see where your feet take you, because God will meet you there on the road.
So good. God will meet you there. Just take
on the path.
God will meet God will meet you on the path, people. That's it. We are all called to walk this path by faith, but know that one step is all you need. Don't overthink it. Yeah. Lindsey,
Totally.
thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks again for having me. It's so good to be with you.
Wow, what an incredible conversation with the one and only Lindsey Krinks. I want to thank her first and foremost for taking the time to speak to us. And a thought for you today before I go. Cornel West says that social justice is what love looks like in public. If there was ever a time for us to carry out, execute, live out our faith boldly, it is now. And it looks like social justice. It looks like speaking up for the marginalized and the voiceless. It looks like getting our hands dirty, rolling up our sleeves, and walking in the very footsteps that Jesus walked. This is not a political issue. This is the foundation of our faith. We are to love the poor. We are to help and serve those that need love and compassion and care and provision and shelter. And if we are not doing any of those things, then we need to pack up shop. So guys, I hope that you have been lit up like I have, and let's keep changing the world one day at a time, one community at a time, one person at a time. Until then, keep living, keep loving, keep learning, and I will see you on the path.
Thanks for listening. Please like, download, and subscribe. This has been an Exousia Media production.